Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rich Goodman. I'm the Assistant Director of the Employer and Alumni Relations for the Career Development Office at St. John's College in Annapolis. And I'm joined today by 5 incredible panelists for our Johnnies in Tech panel. These panelists are all St. John's alums, ranging from the class of 2010 to the class of 2022, just last year. So we're very thankful for that range. And they also have experiences ranging from web development, software engineering, data science, and research. So we're very thankful for all of their time to be here today just to inspire students. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. At this time, I would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll just go alphabetically by first name. So we'll start with Avi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Avi. I graduated from the Santa Fe campus last year, 2022. So I'm probably the freshest one here. I'm currently a graduate teaching assistant, master's student, and a researcher at the University of Vermont. I am working with the Vermont Complex Systems Center, doing a lot of research on modeling systems, dynamical systems, and stuff like that, which includes a lot of data science as well. So my path from St. John's is pretty much directly, as soon as I graduated, I started my grad program. However, during my St. John's, during the COVID year, I did take a gap year where I took some classes at IIT Delhi back home in India, while I was also a data scientist for a company in US. So I got to have some hands-on experience and started developing an interest in data science and machine learning. And that fit very well with my next plan to study complex systems with data science.
I'm up next. Can you guys hear me? So my name is Brian Fitzpatrick. I'm out of the class of 2015. I graduated from the Santa Fe campus after spending 3 years in Annapolis. Most recently, I was working at Ernst & Young in their government and public practice as a data scientist. But from after St. John's, I took the traditional Johnny route of attempting to make grad school work and then decided to get a real job. And eventually ended up kind of working in the data science field as a data analyst. So I'm somebody who did the worked a job, got interested in it, went into a boot camp, leveraged the boot camp into working first at Express Scripts and then at a bunch of kind of startups and other odds and ends of projects. And currently I own my own small business that does kind of consulting around kind of best practices around data. In addition to doing a lot of modeling work and kind of writing and other kind of publishing adjacent aspects for the space. So I'll hand it off to the next panelist.
I am Casie Schuller, and I was in the Graduate Institute at St. John's in Santa Fe around 2011. And I was actually, my experience at St. John's kind of happened in the middle of my career in tech. So I had already been in tech for a while, took a break, went back to school, partly at St. John's. And then after I finished at St. John's, went back into tech. I work at a large software company. Not going to say the name just to be safe, but if anyone wants, if someone reaches out to me on the side, I can share that. And I've been lucky enough to do a lot of different roles in tech. So software engineering, data analytics, some data science. And currently I'm in what we call a technical program manager role. It's kind of a hybrid between program and product management.
Nice. Okay, yeah, I think I'm up next. We're following the alphabet. Hi, I'm James. I graduated from Santa Fe in 2014, so I think I'm sort of in the middle here. And then after I graduated, I kind of dove right into just straight engineering. So I reached out to a company that I had some ties with back in my hometown, said, hey, can I work for you for not much money? I've been teaching myself, and they said yes. So I ended up working there for about 2.5 years and just tried to work on as many things as possible. That ended up being super valuable, just to try to work across the stack and do like kind of both software engineering and kind of sysadmin work. And then kind of use that to jump into applying to other jobs. Worked for a B2B SaaS company, which is like business to business software as a service company based out of San Francisco. So got more experience kind of working in a team, working in an agile methodology, doing stuff like that, working with project managers. Then after that, about 2 years that I landed a contract working with through a company for the Gates Foundation, and ended up then because of that work, at one point a recruiter reached out from Apple. I do work for Apple now. I do have to say that I don't represent them in any way, so I think if I say that, I'm covered. Yeah, so joined Apple as a contractor in 2020, still doing engineering and web development, and came out full time in 2021. So just about 2 years ago. So yeah, that's kind of my path to here after St. John's. So yeah, and I'll pass it off to Morgan.
Thanks, James. I was like, was it me? I think so.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm Morgan, as was just indicated. I graduated in 2010 from the Santa Fe campus. I'm currently a senior software engineer at Google, just like others have said. I do not represent their views here at all. I think that has me covered. Let's see. Overview of my path after St. John's. So I wandered. I was a wanderer. I did an internship in DC at a think tank for a while, got a job offer and thought, I think I'd rather not. And then I pursued a master's in global affairs and management, thinking I was going to NGO work. And then I found myself super jealous of my brother, who's a self-taught web developer. And I was like, that looks like a lot more fun. So I took a few online courses, did a boot camp. I think it was literally the first boot camp for tech dev boot camp at the time, and got my first job as literally the first full-time hire at a startup in Berkeley, which I stayed at for 5 years. And we moved from seed round all the way to B round, at which point I left, spent a lot of time studying so I could pass the hard interviews at the larger companies, and moved on to Google. And I think that pretty much covers it. I've been there for about 4 years now.
All right, thanks everybody, and thanks again for being here. So we have a lot of questions, so I'll just get right into it. Please feel free to answer the questions in any kind of order you'd like. You don't have to all answer the questions if you don't like to. It's up to you, and we'll just kind of see how it goes. So the first question that we get all the time are there any kind of similarities between studying at St. John's and working or studying in your field? So, and also, how can Johnnies apply what they've learned and value to this work?
I feel like the Johnny education is perfect for this work. I just think it's for me at least, it was a strong mapping for software engineering. When I was all alone at my startup with no other software engineers, no CS degree, and just a boot camp, and I had to figure things out, I was grateful I had attended St. John's and had to figure a bunch of stuff out that frankly was very hard. Forced to do all that math when frankly I'm not a strong math student. Really gave me the confidence that regardless of how difficult something was, if I really focused on it and followed the trail and was clear about my first principles and clear about what I didn't know, that I could ultimately make really good progress. And that ended up being true not only at the startup where I was all alone, but also at Google, where my ability to communicate clearly about what help I do need and what questions I do have, and having the confidence to be very publicly saying very stupid questions, which I think all Johnnies can relate to. They're like, I'm in a seminar, I'm gonna ask it. I feel like it might be silly, but I'm just going for it. That skill set has really scaled well.
As soon as I joined the grads program at Vermont, there was a big shift in like what I was doing. So now I do a lot of graph theory, Bayesian stats, causal inferences, and that is not at all what we cover in St. John's math. But I agree with Morgan that it's really just about asking the questions. And I feel like with my advisors, asking the questions that I ask helped establish a sort of relationship where I get to examine a lot of the assumptions that go unnoticed otherwise. And it's a running joke between me and my roommate, who's also a Johnny, graduated a couple of years ago doing the same program, that we try to find out when our St. John's math finally comes to use. And yesterday he was doing a proof on set theory, and he was like, wait, I've done this junior year. And that's when we noticed that was the first time we ever used the math. But it's really not about the hard skills, because that's easy to learn. It's more about learning how to prove and stuff like that, which has come in incredibly useful in a few papers that I'm working on that do a lot of proofs.
I agree with a lot of that. I feel like the first job that you get if you're working for like a large organized kind of company, you tend not to have a lot of opportunities to directly use your St. John's education, but those soft skills are really important. And being able to kind of like come into a problem and kind of sort through it and be like, okay, what are the parts I understand here? What are the parts I don't? Kind of work through that. That is something that maybe not in the first job on the ladder is super useful in like a day-to-day sense, but it becomes much, much more valuable as you kind of move into working with teams, managing teams, doing all of those pieces. Those soft skills become much, much more valuable over time.
Yeah, definitely kind of echoing like what Morgan started with. I think, yeah, I think it's extremely valuable, but I also agree with you, Brian, that like it's not very directly applicable. And I would not say that's a bad thing at all. I would say that it is like the program gets you comfortable with like approaching unfamiliar topics. And in any technical field, I mean, like for us in kind of various aspects of tech, you're always going to be learning. There's always going to be stuff that you don't know. And yeah, figuring out what you know and don't know and being able to think stuff that you don't know, it's like, that's really meta to kind of talk about it at that level. But I think, yeah, that's for me, what I like, that's how I use the program now is like, it's, yeah, you don't learn the hard skills. I didn't learn JavaScript at St. John's, but like, I definitely use all the thinking tools, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and I would add that some of the skills, just in terms of like, you know, reading the situation you're in, because I mean, like technical work, only a portion of it is actually the technical work. Like as a software engineer, there's a certain amount of time that you're actually coding, right? And the rest of it is understanding what depending on the side of the company you're in, but understanding what multiple different groups want, understanding power structures that are involved, the way different people communicate. And so, I mean, I think that that's really the bulk of it. And I think that what I learned at St. John's in terms of being able to listen to multiple different perspectives, read very closely, and then communicate respectfully is all super helpful. And that, I've been in this field for 20 years. I think that is what one of the key things that will determine longevity in the field. Like it's, the technical skills are the must-have, but it's the other stuff that will keep you going.
This is all such a great perspective, you all.
I agree with that completely.
Yeah. So one question that we also get quite a bit too is, you know, so in addition to what they're applying from what they've learned from the program, what are the ways in which they can develop those technical skills that are so often requirements or at least encouragements for applications? And so this is a question that we got from the New Coding Club in Annapolis with Sunri Yang. Thank you very much, Sunri, and also from a few folks as well, just in chat just now. But so how do you recommend developing the technical skills associated with your career? And then how would you not recommend developing the skills?
I'll start on this one, and I'll say part of it is your style. Like like Morgan was saying, if you're a self-study, like, and someone who can take initiative, that's been my approach too. That can work, I think. I think it depends on, in my experience, it depends a little bit on what you want to do in tech. Like in my company, most of the data scientists have PhDs. So, I mean, if someone said to me, hey, if I want to be a data scientist that's writing algorithms, should I try to self-teach? I would say no. I'd be curious about, Avi's perspective on that.
Yeah, plus
think-
1 to, oh, sorry, Avi, were you
Oh, no,
speaking?
go right ahead, go right ahead.
Okay. But plus 1 to what was just said there. Like, it's very important to know what your goal is. There's a lot of ways to be in this field. There's a lot of different size companies to be a part of. And depending on where you're heading, how you want to learn and what you want to learn is very different. Do you need a credential? Do you not need a credential? Do you just need to pass some algorithms and then your foot's in the door? Okay, well, that's a very narrow range of skill. Do well on algorithms with a coding language that's in scope for company X. Very narrow. Is that going to be like particularly relevant if you want to join a startup? Probably not. You probably need a more framework specific stuff. So I think identifying where you're heading answers this question more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, within the data science field, it's such a broad kind of thing, and every single company understands what a data scientist does in a very different way. So if you're working at like a big, say pharmaceutical company or something, data scientist is probably going to be more closer to a reporting analyst kind of skill set, as opposed to if you're in a startup where you have to be able to kind of handle the full stack to some degree, or at least be able to kind of understand it enough. So for like learning the technical skills, I kind of go back and forth. So looking at the kind of thing that was sent around of the questions for, so this references boot camps, micro credentials, Coursera stuff. There is a lot of value to Coursera and kind of the smaller online stuff you can do for yourself, but companies do not necessarily respect those credentials if they're not attached to kind of a larger organization, like for myself, like University of Texas. But that being said, those things are very useful in developing technical skills and getting you to projects where you can kind of point at them and demonstrate, hey, I have used these skills in this way, which tends to be kind of more valuable than just here's my credential that I passed the Coursera course.
I definitely, sorry, go ahead.
No, carry on.
No, I definitely agree with Brian, Casie, and Morgan over here. So it's really, if you just want to do more normal projects to be able to handle data and do some dashboarding, some basic regression, like that doesn't involve anything fancy, and your employers, that's all they need. And most likely if you're working at a mid-sized company, that is really all they need. Having worked on a good project that you can show that, hey, I know one programming language and I can do these things on these programming language, whether it be Python or Julia, C++, anything that you like, that's helpful. But as Casie pointed out, if you need to do anything more complex than that, it's really not about the stack you're working with. It's about the math that you know, and all the information theory stuff. Like for example, you cannot be expecting to work at OpenAI's GPT models having done a bootcamp, right? Because they require a lot more training and a lot more research, which I was also very arrogant of before I actually started learning what it means to be doing research. But those things are very helpful. Those boot camps are very helpful to get you started if you have nowhere to go and you don't know where you want to start. I did a boot camp sort of thing. I took some classes at IIT. It was super helpful in just like getting my feet wet. But then having a master's degree and hopefully then a PhD would take me where I need to be to do the kind of things I want to do.
Yeah, no, that's all super interesting to me. Like I'm coming at this from the like completely self-taught side and the kind of uncredentialed side. So I definitely agree that it just depends on what you want to do. Like what Casie started with, that like for me, I found that to just learn the technical skills, I learned best by just reading kind of a high level book on some kind of tech, whatever it was, whether it was SQL, like JS, just like object-oriented programming, like writ large or something, and then just diving in and trying to develop a project of my own. And just that was the main thing that became the most useful, was, like others have said, is just having things that you can point at and say, whether it's on your GitHub or wherever, you just have to be able to let your work speak for itself. And if that comes from a boot camp, like it sounds like that's worked well for other people. For me, it was similar, just like, hey, I built this. that's all that people really want to see, depending on if that's what you're interested in. If you want to be like writing apps, or for me, I enjoy like web dev work. I'm just, I guess, not as drawn to, say if I wanted to do ML work, you'd probably need some more credentials there. But yeah, if that doesn't draw you, like yeah, I could be your uncredentialed like flag bearer and say like, hey, it's not required. Like it's pretty meritocratic depending on what you want to do. If you can do the work, that's what people want to see.
It is very doable to do, but you need to know how to talk about the projects that you've worked on, I think is the way that I would put it. It's very doable to be self-taught, but you need to be able to in that interview just nail the, here is how I use it, how I understand it, what it does, and then how much time I saved the client or something like that.
Yeah, I think the barrier to entry is a little bit even lower than that, frankly. Like my sister did a boot camp, not the most eloquent woman, love her dearly, and she was told apply to a bunch of different places, like apply. Do not think you have failed until you have put out at least 500 resumes and not gotten a job. And even then, iterate. And watching her go through that, some places, exactly as what was just said here, it's all about your projects. How are you talking about your projects? How are you defending them? Some places are like that. Other places barely talk to you. They're like, here's an algorithm. Did you pass it? Did you get it right? That's all I care about. I care about nothing else. Do you have social skills? I didn't check. I just know that you passed that algorithm. Other places just look at your resume and they're like, oh, you don't have a PhD? We need a PhD. Oh, you didn't go to like MIT, Harvard? That's what we hire. Like there's such variety in this space. There's such opportunity if you know what you want and you know what you care about and you're willing to iterate. So I also want to throw out there, like money is a relevant component when I think about grad school. And it's a totally valid path to take the lowest hanging fruit, get some juicy salary, and then use that to fund your master's program. There's a lot of companies out there that once you join them will pay for your master's program in a CS degree. There's no reason to go into debt, even if your dream is OpenAI and you need that PhD. You can get there through some lower hanging, high paying, dev jobs.
Or just to add one more path to that, you can do research assistantships and teaching assistantships. That's how I'm funding my master's. It's an easy opportunity and pretty good.
And I would just, sorry, is it okay if I add one thing? You can probably infer this from what's been said, but if you think you're interested in tech, but you're not sure, then definitely don't start a master's. Do some boot camp or some online courses, spend hours and hours and hours doing it, trying to build things, see if you actually like it first.
100% agree.
Yes.
Do
100%.
not attempt a
Yes.
master's that you're not at least 90% committed on,
Yeah.
We started to get into this already a little bit too, but so you mentioned a lot of different kind of skills and coding languages and different software. So how do students that are looking to get into the field prioritize which, know which ones to prioritize? Is it based upon job applications that they're seeing so far? Like, what are the things that can indicate where they should focus their time?
I think we sort of covered that when we talked about it really depends on where you want to go.
Yeah.
It dictates everything. It dictates the language, it dictates the credential requirements, it dictates how you prep, it dictates everything. And if you just want the money, frankly, good luck, because I think it's very hard to be like able to put in the time required in this space unless you find it enjoyable to code.
Yeah.
I think speaking for having worked in data science for a couple of years, Excel is a non-negotiable skill. You need to know your way around Excel. SQL, you can kind of get away with not knowing it depending on the job, but it is very valuable to know just because it tells you, here's how you interact with basically any other database. And it gives you kind of a schema for even dealing with, you're kind of like MongoDB type stuff. So I would say kind of like in general, there are some fundamental skill sets that have a lot of applicability across the entire tech space, but stuff like Excel, that is not negotiable. You need to understand your way around it.
But not if you're a web dev, right? You're not saying if you're doing web
Only
development.
for data science.
This very narrow area.
At least within like data science in general, it's You should know Excel. You should understand databases. If you know a programming language, that's a big plus. So like I'm a Python person, but it's one of these things that there are just fundamental things that almost all jobs that you apply for will expect you to at least have familiarity with to some degree.
And
Yeah, I would say, oh, just real quick, I think like I totally agree that this again just depends on what you want to do. And I would say that you can just work like if you don't know anything about the field, it can be hard to figure out how that like translates into like a tech, like what tech you should focus on. So I would just like, it's just like a series of like Google searches of like, I know I want to create pretty user interfaces and I want it to be in the web browser. You can search for like, what is like, how do you create UI in a browser? That leads you to like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, like a web stack. And then you might, and then like, if you look at those, you say like, what is that? What job title does that, what covers that? And then you find the title like front-end developer or like front-end engineer. And then you can look for like, what skills does a front-end developer need? Similar for data science of like, I want to like, you know, gain insight and, you know, Brian, you can correct me, but like, I want like insight into data. I want to be able to extract reports and all this cool stuff. Like, what's that called? And then you find that like, oh, the title for that is data scientist. And then what skills does a data scientist need? So just like work backwards from the problem you want to solve. And eventually you'll find like the job title that corresponds, and you can kind of like go out from there. Yeah, I found that's useful to like, if you don't know anything about a field, just start searching of like, how do I make an iPhone app? And eventually you'll find a job title and kind of skills that like correspond to that.
Another thing that's helpful along that line is look for template resumes for job titles, because a lot of them will include a little line within the tech field of here are the skills, or here are the kind of, well, here's the skills that I have kind of top line. And that will also give you a very good idea of what to target.
And one more thing is also understanding. So first thing, learning these, like getting the basics of these languages is not the hard part. The hard part is getting good at them. But the good thing is you don't have to get good at them unless and until you're working with a team who also uses them. And that is where I have learned that it doesn't matter what I started programming in. So I started my grad school with just knowing Python, right? But then I started working with a team that primarily works with Julia. So I had to do that. And then I'm teaching a class that does primarily C++. So I had to learn that. And so it's really like what teams you're working with, what they prefer. And I think that's especially true in web development. I know there are fights and battles fought over which JavaScript framework is the best for XYZ purposes. So yeah, it really boils down to what team you're working with if you're ever working with a team.
Plus one to that, you can also move around a lot. Like I started in web dev, then I moved to infra, and now when was the last time I wrote beautiful code? Forever ago. It's all soft skills now. It's all writing design docs, reviewing design docs, reviewing other code other people wrote, telling them what I like or don't like about it. Like it's a completely different job when you get higher up the level.
That actually leads well into our next question as well. So we had a question from Charlotte from Annapolis, which asked about how easy is it to move from one specialization to another? So it sounds like there are opportunities to do that within all kinds of different industries.
With some caveats, right? Like if you're going to data science, I'm not going to, I need a PhD. I need a completely different set of skills. Though I will say, I know a Johnny who moved into data science through a boot camp without a PhD, but she did have a master's in a STEM field. And I think she works at like Pandora now, so some well-known company. So it is possible. It's just hard, not promising.
Yeah, I would say it feels, if they're somewhat adjacent, so like say you like working on like you're a backend web dev, like you like working in, I don't know, C#, it's going to be a little bit easier. Say you're tired of developing it for the web and you want to develop Windows apps, like native apps, like that has a lot of tech overlap. So like if things are somewhat more adjacent, it's totally possible. But yeah, if it's very different, it'll be very hard. And like maybe Casie can speak to this, but it is a little, you can also kind of move into things that are adjacent to like strict engineering roles. So like I don't know, interested in like your kind of TPM role, or like, you know, I do I don't know, a fair amount of like what I guess would be called product like work that's, you know, putting together mocks and reviewing designs and things like that that are not coding, but they're still related. So you don't have to be pigeonholed. You can be if you want to be. If you want to write a JavaScript framework, you can do that. But yeah, you don't have to be.
Yeah, like I completely agree with that. It really is just, at least for myself, doing a career switch through a boot camp and then getting into the data science space. It is one of these things of you just need to really understand how to talk about the experiences you have and how they connect to where you're trying to get to. A useful book in general, outside, like it's connected to this, but in general, there's a book called The Defining Decade, which is all about their experiences that you have in your 20s that are immensely valuable to employers, and just kind of understanding how do you talk about it, why is it valuable, how does it connect, gets you into that kind of switch over. And then on a somewhat more specific thing, once you know one programming language, it's a lot easier to pick up a second one. And exactly the same way as if you're bilingual, it's a lot easier to become trilingual.
Yeah, and I would just add too, I think it's easier to move around into different roles within a company. Probably depends on the company, but you know, is it out of the question that I could find myself in a data science role at my company? Probably not, but it's because I know a lot of people, because I do have at least you know, enough of a skill set. I wouldn't be writing algorithms or anything, right? But so within companies, I've found it's easier to move around. So, and then, sorry, James, were you asking something in particular about the tech PM?
Oh yeah, just I guess in general, like if you started out like from straight engineering and moved into like TPM and you're like on your way to just PM work or like something different. I was just curious.
Yeah, so I guess this might be a good thing to say, and everybody can weigh in terms of their experience with PMs, but I, from engineering into tech PM, and so like I said earlier, my background was mainly like databases, some data analytics, software engineering for a few years. That was self-taught, but I was able to move within my company into a full-time software engineering role, and then back to data analytics, nothing I would call data science, but and then now I'm doing tech PM work, right? Which is program management and product management. It's really quite technical. I'm not writing code, but it's still fairly technical. And the one thing I would say is that if you're considering a program manager path within this industry, at least a technical one, it really helps to have an engineering background. I would start on the engineering side and move into a tech PM role. That would be the path I would take.
Yeah, I can plus one that. I had a friend move into a TPM role from a non-technical project management role. And her interview sounded a heck of a lot like my interview for a software engineer. She had to learn a lot of similar stuff, but it was very hard for her because she had no background in it whatsoever, no context. She never actually worked with it. She was just like memorizing things and being like, let's hope it goes well. And it went well for her, but it's just harder.
Yeah.
I want to go back for a second to graduate school. So for students that are considering grad programs, what advice would you give to Johnnies who are deciding which school or which program is best for them once they identify which track they want to take?
I can go first because I feel like I just went through that process. So first, I wouldn't recommend, again, I feel like this has been brought up, don't do a program that you're not 100% or at least 95% committed to, because grad school I thought would be easy because St. John's was pretty hard. And it's not hard in the same way, but it is a lot of busy work and you really need to be focused and committed to what you really want to be doing and that you enjoy doing. So having that insight is great. So let's just say you already have that insight that you want to go more into computer science, you want to go more into research, or you want to go more into data science, or any of these mixed fields. The next point is to identify the programs. And usually you want to identify the programs based on what work is being done there. And that may be true for even if you just want a professional degree. If you have people who are doing interesting work in those fields, then you are much more likely to be exposed to a larger community. And the other thing, so it's that, and then the finances. It's easy to say that, oh, I am ready to go to Harvard or MIT, but they would charge you the Harvard and MIT prices. And it's harder to get assistantships and scholarships for professional degrees there. So balancing all of that is really important. I found my programs by going through all the data science programs for all the public universities, and the Complex Systems Center was the closest I could find to what I really wanted to do. And they also had partnerships with the Santa Fe Institute, and I had met some professors there. So there was like a direct relationship, and it made a lot of sense to go there. Other than that, I also got into Penn State and CU Boulder, and even though CU Boulder did have great research, they were not willing to match the funding that UVM was providing. So it's going to be a mix of factors, but most importantly, it's going to be what you really want to do and understanding what's the best fit long-term in your career.
That's super interesting. So I don't have a direct perspective since I haven't taken that path, but I would say, like, for me, I guess that question would just be, like you're saying, Avi, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to do computer? I would say, like, I somewhat think of computer science and computer engineering as kind of separate things. Like, an engineer is the practitioner, and I love being the practitioner. It's super fun to build stuff. I don't get as much out of developing the algorithms myself. So, like, do you want to do research? Do you want to advance the field of computing, or are you using it to get a job? And if you're using it to get a job, I would, just look for alums, and like, how do alums do from the program? What companies do they land at? Yeah, that would be, I guess, kind of the more like career oriented way that I might look at it.
I'll just add something that's a little different. At my company, we have moved to a recruiting process that is at least aiming to be university agnostic. So in terms of, prestige, there were some questions about that to begin with. We're trying to pull away from that. It's going to take a while, but that's at least the direction we're going.
Yeah, and I was told the same thing as well going in. My mentor was like, everyone is going to pay the data scientist the same price or the same salary, right? And it's a very technical thing, and it's really about how good you are. A lot of companies have started to now shy away from, like, oh, is this person from this big university? But maybe prestige would help. I don't know. I didn't choose that path. So
at least speaking for myself, I don't know how much prestige matters, although being connected to a large program, the access to the alumni network and assistantships, job placement, all of the kind of like secondary parts that come with being attached to the program, those are immensely valuable. The prestige of the program itself, unless you're doing like specific types of research things, I think is pretty interchangeable between basically any large kind of public institution school program. But of course, you're always going to run into people who are like, well, he went to MIT or something. But I wouldn't worry too much about that in general.
What would you all say are some misconceptions that people, or especially Johnnies, might have about working within your field or starting to work in your field that you want to correct?
Math skills. I just want to double down on this. I was not good at math. And my little sister, who I really got into programming and now loves it, was particularly bad at math, and it was a huge blocker for her to even consider the field. And I had to remind her that there's a lot of different roles, and some do require great math skills and a lot of, education, and some don't. And so a lot of people I meet are like, oh, software engineer, that's a very specific type of intelligence and background. And they almost always expect me to be a math whiz. And it just isn't required. Obviously, depending on the role.
Yeah, 100%. I am also not a math person. I mean, I made it through St. John's. I passed the algebra test or whatever, but yeah, that was about it. So yeah, absolutely, it's not a math. It does not have to be math. There are things in the field that, yeah, you need to know linear algebra and be very good at it, but not everything. I think the only other thing that I would say is a misconception is that like working in tech is about working with computers. Like it's definitely about working with people. Like people have already said, like the further you go, the more it's about soft skills. That matters at the beginning too. You have to have the hard skills to back it up, especially at first, but yeah, working with tech is still just about working with people. It's all about building trust and knowing like team members that you can depend on, and building trust with your manager, your customers, if you're like working directly with them. Yeah, the computer is just a tool, and like you can write amazing code and it doesn't do at all what people actually want. So sort of like Brian was saying at the beginning, like you got to know what your projects are, the why behind your projects, or whether that's your own and you're trying to get into your first job, or you're, you know, trying to get a promotion and you're selling, you know, this thing that you told your team to build. You're telling your higher ups, why did we build this? Yeah, it's all about people.
I feel like for the data field in general, the one specific thing that I would say that's a misconception is machine learning is not magic. It is not a black box. Algorithms are not magic. There is a very explainable way to how something like ChatGPT works that is not mysterious in any way. That's just one general thing, but I think kind of more specifically to doing actual work in the data science space, like 5% of the time you are working on a puzzle and trying to figure out the solution, and maybe you come up with a very cool kind of code math way to do it or whatever. But 95% of your problems are all going to be data quality, data cleaning, where the source is coming from, what the information actually means. And that's the actual meat of most of the work that you do within the data science field. But all of that, you know, all of the kind of grunt work to get there is so you can work on the very interesting kind of questions that pop up in being kind of the subject matter expert on that field within a company.
Yeah, I want to add, I hope I phrase this in an appropriate way. You don't have to be smart. I think there's this sense you have to be a particularly quick person, a particularly smart person to succeed in this field. And you don't. I've worked with several people who it takes a bit of time for them to catch on. But once you know something, you know it. Like the difference between the person who gets things the fastest and the person who gets it the slowest, like obviously there's a huge range there. But once you get it, you get it. And I find that the people I've worked with in the past who maybe it took a little longer for them to get something, they're specialize. They have a less options in their career because they are specialists, and they have to be very careful about what they specialize in, and being sort of looking ahead to be like, okay, do I need to change this specialty because that language is about to die? So it's a much less secure option. But I think this myth of being like the brilliant hacker in the corner, there's so many things wrong with it. A, you're not in a corner, you're surrounded by people, as many people have pointed out. But B, you don't have to be brilliant. Like you really don't. Like this should be a relatively low hurdle to jump over to get into this field, and you can do really well.
Yeah, and
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to add to that. There are a lot of ways to be good at any of this. And so like to Morgan's point, maybe you're not the fastest, but maybe you're the most thorough. Like maybe you think of things that other people aren't thinking of, right? That we wouldn't have found out until the product releases and there's a bug because, you know, someone did something really fast, but it wasn't as complete. And then the other thing I would add to that is, this isn't really, I don't think it's a misconception, but I would be surprised if any of you disagree, but you do really have to have a very high tolerance for frustration. Like most of the time, like 99% of the time, what you're working on doesn't work yet. Like, you know, it doesn't, it's broken, it's not right. It's just so, and you do have to be very tenacious and like solving problems. Yeah.
It is pretty beautiful when you finally figure it out, though.
Yeah.
You know, like reading the docs or whatever, you're like, oh, it's just an option. Okay.
Sure, but I definitely remember when I was doing my boot camp, I was like, I'm incompetent. It takes me forever to solve these things. Like I am destined for failure. I'm the unplaceable. And then the most senior instructor did a live coding thing. I don't think anything he coded worked the first time he ran it. He was writing the simplest program in theory. And he was like, oh, that didn't, oh, okay. Oh, maybe this. Like he was just doing his iterative process and he got there. And I was like, oh, I don't have to always like get it quickly as long as I keep going. And like, I agree, very frustrating, but I also think the self-confidence being a Johnny gives you that you will figure it out, that you have that power is really amazing.
I really like that because as I got here, I had like a lot of imposter syndrome because these people were throwing around jargon I had never heard before and I wasn't comfortable with. And the truth of the matter is that it's really simple concepts clothed in very fancy words. And that's all they, like, for example, we don't say random, we say this is a stochastic process. Like what is stochastic? It means the same thing, but we like saying it. So yeah, a lot of the time it's a lot of jargon and it's a lot of frustration. And I have probably, and that I feel like I had a tutor, Mr. Bleichmar, my junior year. He's an amazing tutor. And one time we were really struggling with some of the math involved in our junior lab, and we were doing the Maxwell's equations and stuff like that. And he was like, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's slow down. Let's see what we know. Let's see what we don't understand. And let's proceed from that. And I think about it every day whenever I'm trying to do research. And I'm frustrated a lot, but then I'm like, okay, what would Mr. Bleichmar do? And I do that. And it's really helpful.
And so when Johnnies are introducing themselves in these interviews, how do you, what unique qualities should they market about the program or their experience or their academic background to effectively market their experience towards these different industries?
I mean, I'll be honest, I never talked about my schooling whatsoever. It was 100% irrelevant besides my boot camp because it was all about the skills. It's one of the most meritocratic areas. Even if you didn't have a PhD and you're going into data science and you got an interview, which you would if you applied to enough places and you hit it out of the park, they'd be like, I guess that works. You know, it's the only reason in these areas that they do require or start to interview on PhDs because it's very unlikely you have those skills without that background. So I have never been in an experience where it's relevant to talk about being a Johnny except in a social experience. Same with my master's degree.
I think there are moments where it is valuable to talk about, but they're very specific. And if you're like me, when you first came out of St. John's, when somebody asks you about where you went to college, it takes about 4 minutes to explain all of the relevant pieces of it. That's not going to cut it when somebody has, 20 or 30 interviews that they are doing that day. What they want to hear is kind of, here's the key nugget of information that when I ask you where you went to school, what you studied, what you worked on, this is like the one nugget that I want to find. So what I kind of say when it comes to kind of emphasizing like the qualities of St. John's stuff, it's soft skills. You just got to learn when to slot in like a statement like, when I'm a junior, we did Kant and Newton and everything else at the same time. And I somehow managed to learn all of it. Being able to slot that in as one sentence can be very valuable, but it's all about context because most people, or at least most people who are very busy are not going to understand what you're saying to them when you're explaining kind of the Johnny ethos, I think might be the way I'd put it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I haven't ever like spent time talking about it in an interview. I would say that it's worth mentioning, and I just kind of like you're saying, Brian, like it's worth just finding some way to like reference how interesting St. John's is and basically how weird we are, because it does make you interesting like as a candidate. So like it's worth like, you know, definitely obviously have it on your resume and find some way to mention it and why it's interesting of like, oh yeah, it's a just something to pique their interest of like, oh yeah, it's an all required program. Yeah, I graduated with a class of like 65, so super small. I got a lot out of it. Anyway, after that, I did this and this and this, and I built these 10 projects, and here's why it's great. So all they care about is results. Like they want to know what you can do for them day one. But St. John's does make you interesting. You're not just another CS grad. No matter what you do after it, like you've been branded as unique. So hope that's okay for all you people. But yeah, it's still all about results.
It is very valuable. It does make you stand out, but it takes a little bit before you start running into kind of the level of people who have generally heard of St. John's and are familiar with the program and actually care about the longer explanation of what you worked on.
Yeah, so this obviously didn't match my experience, but I will add that I know people who got their first jobs by taking something they were passionate about and applying to roles where they'd be working in a company that was engaged with that. So if one of the reasons you joined St. John's is because you really love X about it, and you find some job role in a company that's involved in anything like that, then this would be a great opportunity to talk about St. John's. As I said, didn't go that path myself, but I saw several people use their passions as a really good way to set themselves apart and get jobs that otherwise they maybe wouldn't have been the best fits for.
It's definitely a great hook. And how I like to do it is I like to dynamically change my resume regarding St. John's. So if I'm applying to something that I feel like before I started my grad program, I would focus a lot about like, oh, St. John's math and lab program. But now that I have some grad program and I have this testimonial of technical skills, now I'm like, oh, I actually did more of philosophy and literature. And they're like, whoa, how did that happen? And they want to know about that. And but most importantly, if you're starting out, it's best if you start with connecting with St. John's alums and see if they can get you hired, because they already know what you know, and they really care about you. And that's been my personal experience, is I have spoken with a lot of St. John's alums, and I don't think anyone has turned me down saying like, oh, I don't want to talk to you, or I don't want to help you. So starting with that is the best approach, because then you don't have to deal with how do I present St. John's, because they know St. John's. But if not, then doing some boot camp or a project and then using St. John's as a hook and that as a meet, that's worked for me the best.
All right, folks, I think we have time for one more question. So this is from Bibu in Annapolis. He asks, how do I approach employers to ask about training opportunities before the job? Are there any opportunities that include training that lead into a guaranteed job?
Yeah, there are apprenticeships and internships. Apprenticeships have become more common. Some of the boot camps that aren't necessarily as well regarded often lead to the apprenticeships. Frankly, I think if you can get an apprenticeship, you can probably study a little bit more and get a junior role. We were heavily encouraged to ask what the onboarding process looks like. Some places onboard you and they give you a mentor and they do pair programming and you learn a lot through that process. Other expectations that you might want to look for is CL's reviews. Like when I was at my startup, I literally had to negotiate as part of my contract that my company would hire me a mentor, because I was like, I'm not a senior software engineer. I just came out of boot camp. I can't be the sole software engineer. That's crazy. And they like let me hire people to sort of mentor me in areas like security, that I wasn't going to do that. In contrast, at Google, I have very senior engineers reviewing the CLs I used to write. And I was able to learn so much from them, and it was just almost free education. So I think asking about their onboarding is a nice way to ask how they're going to support you and ensure your success as a junior, without being like, I'm scared, which is probably what you're actually feeling, because that's how I was feeling.
Yeah, same. So like at Apple, we do have a couple programs that are kind of like intern programs. We have like the early career development program where it's for recent grads. If you're like coming out of a CS degree, I don't know. So that would be something to do like if you did a postdoc or something. So if it's a big company and you are trying to go in the front door, that's an option. But yeah, I agree. Yeah, just asking, hey, how do you know what do the first 3 months look like? Like, how do you? I mean, that will immediately show you the holes in their onboarding process, because they will either have a good answer or they'll just be like, oh, you know, you'll talk to Steve and you know, he's great, been here forever. That's kind of a red flag. You want to hear that they have at least a little bit of a defined process.
Another thing that's very helpful to ask in basically any job interview, not just in the tech field, is what makes somebody successful in this role, and what have been challenges that kind of previous applicants have had in the role, because that will give you a very good idea of the kind of general universe of metrics that the person hiring at least is kind of thinking of. But it's always worth asking the question of what makes somebody successful here, because they will tell you things like, oh, well, we need somebody who's much more collaborative, as opposed to being necessarily a purely technical person or something like that, and that can clue you into this job is not exactly lined up with its description.
Hey, everybody. Well, thank you all so much for being here tonight for our panel. Thank you to our panelists and our attendees. Had a lot of good information here tonight. I really appreciate the different perspectives and just all the sage advice.